Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Horse Race Bets. I am Ken Rudolph, and we're putting this whole thing together and into action. But why are we doing this? Well, I'm doing this because I absolutely think it's a really incredible sport, the sport of horse racing. I have a really, really great time playing it. I have a fun time reading the news and the news and the notes and the gossip and the rumors, and then I kind of put it all through my own filter after 25 years of experience. And I kind of want to share a lot of that with you people on a daily basis. Also, full disclosure, this whole thing kind of serves as sort of an extension of my therapy, like just being able to talk about things that I've seen, things that I have witnessed, things that I went through in the 25 years that I covered horse racing. And I think it also just continues to add more perspective. And if there are any new people who really don't know a whole lot about horse racing and they stumble upon this, maybe it'll give them the, I don't know, the impetus, the excitement, the spark to find out more and maybe just play it. Just play it the same way that you would gamble anything, the same way you would play roulette wheel, play blackjack, play poker, slots, whatever the case may be. You can apply that same thing to horse racing. It just takes a tiny bit more effort. So we jump into this week, and we're coming off of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday when they have great racing across the country on that particular holiday. But that brings me to a little something that took place with me on the air, and I kind of had been thinking about it a lot, and I was wondering, like, why did that bother me so much? So I want to take you back a couple of years. We'll go back even further than that for story time here. So, as I mentioned, we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the holiday with horse racing every year, and they have tracks open on that holiday. And it's always good racing and it's fun. Well, in the 20 some odd years or whatever that I on and off of TVG and FanDuel on air, I never heard anyone tell any stories about Dr. King and his connection to horse racing. And and I thought that was interesting. So when I stumbled upon the history and found the story, it goes back to 1967 and 68, and it concerns a Kentucky Derby winner by the name of Dancer's Image. And Dancer's Image was owned by a man named Peter Fuller. Now, the thing about Dancer's Image, no one even talked about that horse again until maybe like 2008. There was an article written that called it probably the most controversial of all the Kentucky Derbies. And then, of course, when we came around after the 2020 campaign and Churchill Downs suspended Hall of Fame trainer Bob Baffert for the situation with Medina Spirit was therefore disqualified from that Derby victory. So we've only had it happen 2 times. But the first time it happened was back in 1967 and 68. And 68 Kentucky Derby. So Mr. Fuller owned this horse named Dancer's Image. Dancer's Image was coming into the Kentucky Derby. Now, Mr. Fuller had already kind of made a name for himself because he did something that a lot of other people were not willing to do, and he did it publicly. He was a very wealthy supporter of the Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. King, and his wife, Coretta Scott King. And he had just won a race, and he donated the more than $60,000 in purse winnings to Coretta Scott King because he won the race just days after Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. So as he was approaching the Kentucky Derby, Mr. Fuller felt like that act would bring him an increased amount of scrutiny and maybe even some attacks. So he asked the security to put extra men around his horse. Cut to, the race is run. Dancer's Image wins the Kentucky Derby. And then all of a sudden they come back and say, hey, your horse tested positive for a banned substance. Mr. Fuller is like, no, he did not. We didn't give that horse anything. So he always felt, and a lot of people feel, like he was targeted because he was a sympathizer. Now let's go back and think about some of the history with Dr. King. Now before that happened, there was actually a boycott, and there were actually protesters on the track at Churchill Downs the previous year. The leaders there in Louisville, Kentucky, were concerned that the track is right there next to a neighborhood, and in that neighborhood they did not have fair housing for minorities, so it was very discriminatory. And so they decided to boycott the Derby to bring attention to their cause, right? As they were on the track or getting ready to try and stop this race leading up to during that week, they told them that we're gonna come on the track and we're gonna sit down and you're not gonna be able to run this race. So Dr. King reached out to the leaders there of the black community in Louisville, Kentucky, and he also reached out to city leaders. And he said, look, if you can meet with these individuals, I will tell them to call off this boycott and we'll all sit down and we'll talk. And that's what happened. They called off the boycott. They sat down and they talked. Within a year and a half after those discussions, they eventually created legislation. Fair housing was brought in to that area of Louisville, and that helped out a lot of people. Now, that's Dr. King's connection to the Kentucky Derby and Churchill Downs. And then we talked about Peter Fuller and Dancer's Image. Now, here's where we get into the interesting thing. My whole goal as a host has always been, hey, I want to set the scene and I want it to be as organic as possible. So I didn't tell anyone that I was telling that story to open the show on that particular Monday morning. But I knew that I had 15, 20 minutes before we got to any activity whatsoever. So I know that my job as the host is to find a way to fill that time with something that you can use, right? Not just a bunch of nonsense, but something you can use. So I told the story and everyone's like, oh my God, I did not know that. You know, and I gave them the reference and said, you can go look this up and find out more about it so you don't think I'm making this up. And, you know, people were really, really cool about that. And I appreciated that. They were very receptive. They were like, hey, I didn't know that. And then I looked it up and you're right, that's crazy, And it was really, really a great moment. And we were all able to share and tell that story. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So I love to do that because I was not prompted to do that by anyone. I decided myself and did the research and made sure I had it all in order and delivered it to the viewing audience. So then what happens after that, the very next year on Dr. MLK Jr. Day, I'm going to host again in the morning. My producer calls me in the morning. That morning, as I'm on my way, she's like, hey, you know, last year when you told that story about Dr. King, that was great. Can you tell it again? Immediately, I'm like, no, absolutely not. She's like, why not? It was great. People probably missed it. And here's my thing. My thing about that is, I'm like, first off, I don't I don't like doing anything that I'm told to do. Okay, but especially when it comes to something that I feel like I should be in control of. And what I mean by that is, I don't like doing anything for Black History Month. In the 25 to 30 years that I've been doing television, whether I was the news anchor or the sports anchor or the reporter or the host, I would never, ever do anything for Black History Month. Why? Because I'm not going to let you tell me when I can celebrate my history. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be a part of any of that. I'm not going to go out and do any performative pieces during the month of February so I can get you to understand the contribution that my people have made to this entire structure. I'm not doing that. Why? Because I control it. I control the historical narrative, my own. I tell you. And more importantly, I would always say to my producers and my co-anchors, I'm like, it's Black History Month. Why don't you go do the story? Why don't you go learn something about Black history? I already know it. You go out there and do the research and then you present the story, because it would carry far more weight if you did it than if I did it, because you're expecting it from me, but we're not expecting it from you. So I remember sitting with that and being like, because I really liked my producer. She was really, really, really cool and really nice and really smart. But I just did not want to do that. And there's also the added thing of being the only Black person on the air in horse racing the entire time I was there. And I know that people are going to be like, oh, well, there's that guy in New York. And I'm not going to get into that. Everybody knows how I feel about that, and that person knows how I feel about him. So I'm not getting into that. But that person is nowhere near me, nowhere near my level of integrity, and has a different purpose. That person is just there to pick horses and handicap. The person is not being asked to host a show, interview. He's doing interviews, but he's not doing it the same way that I was asked to do it. Different. So I just remember that being one of those things where I was like, you know what? I am never, ever going to let them tell me when I share that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of the thing that a lot of Black people feel. And when white people, bless their hearts, are using MLK quotes on that holiday and no other day of the year, we're like, why are you doing that? Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't pander and don't use our historical figure to push some bullshit concept that you have for a better existence, because it's not the same when you know. All right? Great. All right, so we move on from that. That was our story time to get things started. But now we have to get into the discussion of what's happening right now, right? You're getting ready for the Kentucky Derby. It's so much fun. As long as your horse is not Dancer's Image or Medina Spirit, it's a pretty fantastic day. And so you have to get yourself prepared because we all love to play it, and I want to help you get prepared to play it, right? So what are the things that you approach? We've talked about how you look for horses and how you do that as your own business. But what about the trainers? Do you care? The question is, who do you trust as a trainer, right? Who do you trust to go out there and make it happen? Who do you trust that their training methods, the way that they select them, when they purchase the yearlings, the pedigrees they look for, where they spot the horses, everything about them, who do you trust? Those are easy, right? You trust the quote-unquote usual suspects. You trust Bob Baffert if you got any sense. You trust Todd Pletcher. Why? Because those two individuals have won the Derby more than once. And those two individuals are in a great position to get fantastic stock, great quality horses at a young age, and then they're able to do what they need to do over a long period of time. And it's proven. Those guys know how to get horses ready. Doug O'Neill does an exceptional job, great job, has been able to get horses there and get them ready to rock on multiple occasions. Gotta respect that. Even Brad Cox, who hasn't officially won a Kentucky Derby yet, right? Earned one because Medina Spirit was disqualified, so Mandaloun ends up getting it. Trainers don't want it that way, but I really, really believe that those individuals will always have something ready to go, right? They'll always be in the right position. The only question is, who do you trust? And even if I'm not picking Bob Baffert's horse, which on many occasions I don't think I've ever selected a Bob Baffert horse in the Kentucky Derby in my life. Never. So then why do you start with him, Ken? Because he's where it all starts. My whole goal has always been, okay, the Derby is where you can make some money. So how do you make money? You got to beat the favorite. Who's the favorite? Usually it's Bob Baffert. And so I just always kind of look at his horse and say, okay, what can I do with this? And now I've learned after watching horses like War Emblem and Medina Spirit do what they did on the front end. I now know, I'm like, look, Bob Baffert is not going to really come from off the pace with a closer in the Kentucky Derby. That's not what he does just yet. If the horse does that naturally, then yeah, Bob will probably train that like he had Point Given. But then you can see how a horse like that is at a disadvantage when he doesn't get the pace he needs or he doesn't like the surface. So you start with connections like that, and then you kind of stay there. And then you think, okay, and it doesn't mean you pick those trainers every single time. It just means you kind of start there, and that might be your target. Like, okay, I'm trying to beat that horse, or I'm trying to beat that horse. And that's how I've been able to make money in the Kentucky Derby, which in my opinion is what the whole thing is about, making money. So now you've got your horse, you've got your trainer. What about the driver? Derby jockeys. Who do you love? Right? Because they all pretty much have kind of the same skill set, but who do you love? Well, obviously, you got to go with the connections or the jockeys that have proven themselves time and time again. My first Derby winner comes from Hall of Famer Mike Smith, Giacomo at 50-1. And here's the weird thing. I don't think I've bet Mike since in the Kentucky Derby. I did bet him a second time, and it was a mistake. Because my thing is, I know all these jockeys are incredible and they're capable, but I have a hard time going with a jockey jumping on a Derby horse for the first time. It happens all the time. I know it. I just don't really love it. And it was Midnight Bourbon that that Mike Smith jumped on at the last minute for Steve Asmussen. And it's probably the first time where I watched Mike Smith ride and I was like, what are you doing, bro? That's a horrible idea. And I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know how to ride the horse, right? But I know what I'm looking at and what I wanted to see from that horse, and Mike didn't do it. And that's not really Mike's fault. Mike was doing what he thought was right. I didn't care for it. So my point is that you don't ride with the same jockey all the time. But if the situation presents itself and you kind of see what you want, that jockey can be the difference maker. Obviously, I'm going to go with Mike Smith if he's on something I really like. Who else would I like go with? Right? I would probably go with, if I was going to go with one, trying to think. I guess Mike, obviously, Johnny V. John Velasquez has shown me on multiple occasions he's incredible. Like, he's probably one of the few jockeys where I feel like an absolute idiot for not recognizing his greatness immediately. Like, that dude is, man, he's stealth. Like, he does some things where I'm watching John Velasquez ride, and I'm like, where did he come from? How did he get inside there on the rail? And how did he do? I didn't even see his horse. And then there he goes. So he's definitely a jockey that now I probably look at a lot more than I used to. And I'm still shocked I can get value on horses that Johnny V's riding. Okay, those guys have already proven themselves by winning multiple derbies. But then you want to go with other riders. You're like, okay, I know you haven't won just yet, but man, I trust you. And that's both the Ortiz brothers. Irad Ortiz Jr. and Jose Ortiz are incredible. I know there are people out there like, man, they're always doing dumb stuff. It's questionable. That's true. That's true. But I don't question their intent to win. I don't question their instincts and their timing. There's some other things about them that you might think, what are they doing? But I know for a fact that they want to win the race. So there's just, riders out there where I'm like, if you just give them a chance at some point, I think it's going to work out. But at the end of it, right, it doesn't matter what trainer you trust. It doesn't matter what jockey you love. It's just about all three things coming together. Because it doesn't matter. Because they're all capable, right? I remember when Flavien Prat was aboard Country House. And I remember looking at that race and saying, I do not like Maximum Security. I know he's fast. I don't like him. I love John Court and Long Range Toddy, but I don't think he has any chance whatsoever to win the race. And so I just kept looking around, and there was something. I was intentionally looking for a price, and I saw Country House at like 65 to 1. And I'm like, I love Bill Mott. He's an incredible Hall of Fame trainer. Hadn't won the Derby just yet, but that's got nothing to do with how capable he is. And I felt like people were sleeping on Flavien Prat. He'd been so incredible on the West Coast, but as far as the national stage was concerned, he wasn't getting the buzz. And I'm like, man, this dude can ride. I'm like, I don't like any of these horses. And I know Bill Mott's got this horse ready. And I like the way Prat rides. You know what? Let's do it. So that's why, I ended up betting $25 to win. And I ended up keying the horse on top in the exacta on Derby Day. Yeah, we got lucky because we got put up via disqualification. But I tell everybody who's a hater about that, I'm like, look, Country House didn't get put up from 5th place to 1st. He was in the race every step of the way, dealt with that bumping and that traffic, and was still in the mix. Now, he definitely should have gone by Maximum Security in the stretch like any good horse should have, but he didn't. But he was still in the mix, and then he was rewarded because he was interfered with. End of story. But my point being is that anybody can do it. Rich Strike with Sonny Leone, right? And Eric Reed. It's just good, solid horseman, good, solid horse, good, solid, experienced jockey. Boom, boom, boom. They all come together. And when they all come together like that, it's a beautiful thing. So it doesn't really matter, right? Just do whatever you want to do. All right. So when all of those things are said and done, horse racing usually kind of wraps up their season by celebrating it at the beginning of the next season. And what they have is called the Eclipse Awards. Eclipse Awards coming up on Thursday night in Florida. So it's a chance for horse racing to, pay tribute to all of the connections and honor the best of the entire year. 11 categories for the equine, 6 for human beings, right? And it's always a very, very long, and boring evening. I've covered it live on a couple of occasions. I did red carpet for 2 years when it was out there in Beverly Hills. And how do I explain? Well, first off, I've always hated the Eclipse Awards. Every time that I covered it, I was the only black person in the building that wasn't wearing a waiter's uniform, that wasn't clearing tables. And I just always hated it. And it's also long. And there's really not much of a point to it. Like, seriously. Like in every other sport, if you win, like you'll see people debating right now online, and they're pretty aggressive about who's going to be the MVP, right? The AFC MVP and the NFC MVP in the NFL, right? There's this whole big, huge debate about Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Now, trust me, a lot of that has to do with fans. It has to do with racial divide, because that's what the media wants to do these days. They completely want to stoke that divide between us, and there is one, yeah, which we could work out one-on-one, but the media is not going to let us do that. So that's a huge part of it. But if you know anything about sports and professional sports, you know, first off, those things matter in terms of their personal contracts. There are incentives in every player's contract. If you make the All-Star team, right? You play in the All-Star game, or you win the MVP, or you get postseason honors. There's little things. You know, some guys get a $500,000 bonus for being the MVP. So that matters to them. And when it comes to going into the Hall of Fame, those things matter as well for these athletes. So I think that it's very consequential in other sports. However, in horse racing, it's kind of inconsequential. It's only something that matters to them. Extremely insular. And it doesn't really enhance anything. I don't know. No one could ever tell me that if your horse was given an Eclipse Award, does that increase their stud value? No one could tell me that there's a direct correlation between the two. So it's just kind of like handing out hardware and handshakes just for nothing. So, like, why do you do it? I don't know. It is a long and a very boring evening. And I remember the times that I covered it. I had fun with the red carpet because I always have fun. I do remember there being one moment, and I didn't know it. I had two moments where I was like, yikes, shouldn't have done that. And I think they're both funny. Some folks may not think so, but I think they're both funny. Two moments. One was the year that I was doing the red carpet and then also presenting two awards. And the awards that I presented were back to back. So did the whole red carpet thing. You know, it's fine. It's fun. And like talking to the people and just trying to get them to relax and trying to learn more about the connections and their personalities. And then we start the awards. And then, yeah, maybe midway through the awards. So, you know, back then with the Eclipse Awards, we had Hollywood celebrities that would come out. I still remember actor Jerry O'Connell was our MC that year, and he was always really fun and really nice. And Larry King, late great Larry King, would always be a part of our award show. And so I remember we did our thing. Larry presented before I did. And so Larry King went out, da-da-da-da-da-da. He came out, and then he came back to the side of the stage. And that's where I'm standing. And I mean, I said hi, and he says hi, and I keep it moving. I don't have a problem with him. I just don't like to waste anyone's time. I try to be nice, and then I don't want to take up your time. I get out of your way. So then it's my turn to go and present. Now I have to present, and then Larry's still sitting over there, Larry King, and he's going to present again too, and then I got to come back out. So I go out, and I present the award, and I have no context for like where I am physically on the stage. Come to find out, as I present the award, they come up, I shake their hand, and I step out of the way and I go back. But I had no idea that I'm standing in the camera shot. I'm right behind the person, and that's extremely distracting for people. I didn't have any idea, right? So then I can hear somebody going, Ken. And I look over, and it's Larry King, and he's like, Ken, get out of the shot. And I'm like, and if you go back, I don't even think we have video. You'll see me. I go like that because I'm back there smiling. I go, and then I kind of slide to the left and I get out of the shot. And I always felt like, dang it, I didn't want to mess up that person's speech. I had no idea I was standing behind there. But then the second mistake that I made, and I've never told anyone this. So there is, we had a sponsor, and I do believe Grey Goose was the sponsor. I'm pretty sure. And the cool thing about that was that at the end of the evening when you worked it, right? The one young lady who was like the rep or PR or whatever for Grey Goose and helped us would give you this massive bottle of Grey Goose vodka, right? And so that was kind of the cool thing. I'm such a dummy. And so this woman is, look, man, I'm just going to be honest with you. Women have all these ridiculously stupid rules about their friggin' vanity, and I've never played that game. I understand it, but I don't care. So she's a shorter girl, and she's always been somewhat heavy set. But not fat, right? So then she shows up this year, and I kid you not, she had on a low-cut dress, and I didn't remember her boobs being that big. Like I don't know what happened, but I was like, wow, she looks different. And then I made the mistake that I learned that day, and I'm sorry, but I was like, oh, hey, good to see you again. She's like, oh my God, hi, good to see you. She comes in, she gives me a hug. I'm like, hey, how you doing? Da da da. I'm like, you look great, good for you. And then I said the thing you're never supposed to say. And I was like, oh my God, you look great, good for you. When are you due? She's like, huh? I'd never done this with a woman before. I'd never seen that look before. She's like, what? I was like, you're pregnant, right? Good for you. She's like, no, I'm not pregnant. she turned around and she walked away. Suffice it to say, I did not get my big ass bottle of vodka that night. And I was like, oh man. And I've always hated that shit about women. I'm like, man, you know I wasn't trying to be mean or do nothing to you. Fuck out of here with that. I was trying to be nice. Okay, I made a mistake, but why you gotta be all dumb about it? It's stupid. Anyway, it was still my fault. But I'm like, that's dumb. So that just brings me to, okay, how do they make this award show like better? I don't know. Maybe they can add like MTV Awards with the Nickelodeon slime, right? Have some fun with it. Maybe kids are presenters. Award winners get slimed, and I don't know. Have some fun. Have a few musical guests. I don't know, because what's happening right now, it's kind of boring. But we'll see what they come up with in this year's edition of the Eclipse Awards. Of course, it'll be on the network over there with the kids at FanDuel. So we'll see how that works out. And it'll be, I'm sure, the same classic evening it's always been. But it's all white. It's all white. And they're fine with it. And so am I. All right. So those are the thoughts. Those are the things that we're kind of dealing with here. I'm just like, I just feel like they've just got to find ways to make things better and different. Hey, I appreciate y'all hanging out with us again. It's story time. Pretty much 5 days a week here on Horse Race Bets. And coming up in the show, on tomorrow, we're going to jump into some action. We'll actually give out a bet for the crazy place that is Turfway Park. And then later on, we'll be talking about who to play in the big old Pegasus World Cup that's taking place at Gulfstream Park this weekend. All right, until all of that, I'm Ken Rudulph. Thanks again for hanging out with us here on Horse Race Bets. Until then, good luck and enjoy whatever you're into.